Story 1. The Endless Night. I've always loved the solitude of night driving. There's something serene about the empty roads, the rhythmic hum of the tires, and the darkness wrapping around you, like a comforting blanket. But that night was different. It started off as usual. I left my office late, around midnight, and began the long drive home through the winding country roads. The moon was a sliver in the sky, offering little light, and the stars were obscured by thick clouds. I set my car's high beams to cut through the darkness, and turned on my favorite late-night jazz station. As I drove, a sense of unease began to creep in. It was subtle at first, a nagging feeling that I couldn't quite place. After about an hour, I noticed something strange. The road, which I had driven countless times before, seemed unfamiliar. The turns were sharper, the trees lining the road thicker and more oppressive. I chalked it up to my tired mind playing tricks on me. But then, I saw it, a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, waving frantically. I slowed down, rolling down my window a crack. "Do you need help?" I called out. The man nodded, his face pale and gaunt. "My car broke down. Can you give me a lift to the nearest town?" There was something off about him, but I couldn't just leave him stranded. I unlocked the door, and he climbed in, thanking me profusely. As we drove, he remained silent, staring straight ahead. The radio began to emit static, and I turned it off, the silence between us growing heavier. Underscore 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 underscore. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to break the tension. "Just up ahead," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The further we drove, the more the landscape changed. The trees grew denser, their branches arching over the road like skeletal fingers. The air became colder, a chill seeping into the car. I glanced at the man, and for a brief moment, his reflection in the window seemed distorted, almost monstrous. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Just a little further," he said, his eyes now fixed on me. Panic began to set in. I realized I hadn't seen another car for miles. The road seemed endless, a never-ending stretch of blacktop. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. I was completely isolated. Suddenly, the man grabbed the wheel, jerking it to the right. The car skidded off the road, crashing into a ditch. The impact dazed me, and when I looked over, the man was gone. I stumbled out of the car, my heart pounding. There was no sign of him, no footprints in the soft dirt. As I stood there, trying to make sense of what had happened, I heard a sound behind me, a low, guttural growl. I turned slowly, and there, standing at the edge of the trees, was a creature. It had the body of a man, but with elongated limbs and glowing red eyes. I ran, not knowing where I was going, just trying to get away. The creature's footsteps echoed behind me, gaining ground. I tripped and fell, my knees scraping against the rough ground. As I looked up, the creature loomed over me, its mouth opening to reveal rows of sharp teeth. In that moment, I knew I was going to die. But just as it lunged, a blinding light enveloped us. I shielded my eyes, and when I looked again, the creature was gone. I was back on the road, my car intact and the radio playing softly. I never picked up another hitchhiker again. Story 2. The Vanishing Road. It was supposed to be a simple drive home. I had been visiting my parents in the next state over, and I decided to leave late to avoid traffic. The night was clear, the stars twinkling overhead, and the road ahead was straight and predictable, or so I thought. About an hour into the drive, I saw a detour sign. I hadn't remembered seeing any construction on my way over, but I followed the signs nonetheless. The detour took me onto a narrow, winding road that I had never seen before. Tall, dark trees bordered each side, their branches intertwining to form a tunnel of darkness. I drove on, my unease growing with each mile. The road seemed to stretch on forever, with no end in sight. I checked the clock on the dashboard. It was stuck at 2 a.m. I glanced at my phone. No signal. The familiar feeling of being lost began to creep in. As I continued, I saw a dim light up ahead. Relieved, I sped up, hoping to find a gas station, or a diner where I could ask for directions. But as I got closer, I realized it was an old, dilapidated house, its windows dark and its paint peeling. Against my better judgment, I stopped and got out of the car. The air was cold and still, the silence oppressive. I approached the house, my footsteps crunching on the gravel path. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I tried the handle, and to my surprise, it opened with a creak. "Hello," I called out, stepping inside. The air was musty, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. I walked through the darkened rooms, my heart pounding. There was something incredibly wrong about this place, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. In the living room, I found a dusty old photograph of a family. The faces were blurred, but the clothes suggested it was taken decades ago. As I stared at it, I heard a whisper, a faint, ghostly sound that sent chills down my spine. "Get out," it said, the voice echoing through the empty house. I didn't need to be told twice. I ran back to my car, slamming the door shut and locking it. I tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't turn over. Panic set in as I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, a haunting melody filling the car. The clock on the dashboard flashed, and then the engine roared to life. I didn't question it. I just drove, desperate to get away from that house. But the road had changed. It was no longer the narrow path I had been on. It was a broad, empty highway, stretching endlessly into the darkness. I drove for what felt like hours, but there was no sign of civilization, no exits, no other cars. Then, in the distance, I saw headlights. Relief washed over me, and I sped up, eager to catch up with the other vehicle. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a car. It was a truck, an old, rusted delivery truck with no driver. The truck swerved, forcing me off the road. My car skidded to a halt, and I watched as the truck vanished into the night. I sat there, trembling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Finally, I gathered the courage to start driving again. The road seemed to stretch on forever, an endless loop of asphalt and darkness. I glanced at the clock. It still read 2 a.m. I knew then that I was trapped, caught in a nightmare with no way out. I never did find my way home. Story 3. The Hitchhiker's Secret. The night was unusually dark, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting an eerie gloom over the deserted highway. I was on my way back from a business trip, the clock on the dashboard blinking. 1 a.m. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the unknown. As I drove, my headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the occasional road sign and mile marker. The monotony of the drive was starting to wear on me, and I found myself fighting to stay awake. That's when I saw her, a woman standing on the side of the road, her thumb outstretched. I slowed down and pulled over, rolling down my window. "Do you need a ride?" I asked, my voice sounding unusually loud in the quiet night. "Yes, please," she replied, her voice soft and tremulous. "I'm trying to get to the next town." I unlocked the door, and she climbed in, her presence bringing a strange chill to the car. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with long dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold a deep sadness. As we drove, she remained silent, staring out the window. "Where are you headed?" I finally asked, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "Just up ahead," she replied vaguely. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, and the further we drove, the more isolated I felt. The woman's silence was unnerving, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror, and for a moment, her eyes met mine. There was something unsettling in her gaze, something that sent a shiver down my spine. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice tinged with concern. She didn't respond. Instead, she turned to face me, her expression unreadable. "Do you believe in ghosts?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I laughed nervously. "Not really." "Why do you ask?" "Because I am one," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. I felt a chill run through me. "What do you mean?" She sighed, her gaze returning to the window. "I died on this road, many years ago." "Oh."